It's about to happen. Any second now. Come on. Where is it? Let's see it. Oh, there it is. Woo! 20,000. We finally did it. Finally. That's right, we finally did it. 20,000 miles, just over. And so now I can finally get into replacing the top end. But before we do that, I want to actually kind of see what the baseline is, more or less, how it performs now, how it's doing, because riding it around, you would not think that this is a 20,000 mile top end, 20,000 mile engine. So the engine is still very snappy. It will accelerate really well at basically any RPM. I don't really feel like it's any different than a brand new engine or something with a low mileage. But let's put some numbers to it. And so what I think I'm gonna do first is a compression test. So what we're gonna do basically is pull out the spark plug here, put in a gauge, and then crank it over a few times to get what the PSI is at the top of the cylinder here and compare it to what the numbers should be. I'm hoping that it's pretty close to it, if not on par with what the manufacturer recommends. And that way we can kind of see how it's doing, how things are worn. And then we'll do it again once everything's all replaced up here to make sure that, you know, it stays the same or is improved if it needs to be. All right, so before we jump into things, this is the Haynes manual for the Grom. Highly recommend you get one of these if you do any work on it. It's very extensive, much more so than just the regular service manual. And in here, there is a compression test. And so reading through this, it kind of tells you how to do it. But the main point here says a reading of about 160 PSI is good. So that's the recommended PSI. That's what the manufacturer states is normal, basically. So now that we know that, we have a goal here, more or less, of 160 PSI. So let's pull out the spark plug, get the gauge in there, and see what it's at. Now that we got the spark plug out, it's actually a good idea to probably take a look at that, see how it's doing. Might be a little hard to see on the camera. This thing will not focus. But basically, you can maybe tell, but I can see from here that it's got a nice brown color, so it's not overly lean. The inside, the little cylinder thingy there is still white, so it's not burned up at all. There's also no oil, there's no soot, there's no blackness to it. So it's pretty much right in the middle, exactly where it needs to be. It's not too lean, it's not too rich. So that's perfect, that's reassuring. Let's keep going. So we got this just plugged in with the same adapter, so it's a 10mm adapter for those of you that are curious, to this little gauge right here. What we're gonna do basically is now we're gonna try to start the bike with the throttle fully open, so that has the most amount of air that can go in there, and then basically just crank this over a few times, and then this needle will start to go up and up and up, and then kind of settle at some point, hopefully around here, around the 160 mark, which is right about there. So let's get cranking. First attempt, 150 on the dot. Do it one more time just to be sure. Yep, that confirms it. 150 on the dot. So not exactly 160, but that's still pretty good. Pretty good for 20,000 miles and 5 years of work. So now that we know that that's 150 rather than 160, one of the things it does mention in here, if you continue on the manual, it says if it's reading low, it could be due to a worn cylinder bore, piston rings, failure of the head gasket, blah, blah, blah. There's an additional test you can do to determine which cause it is. Remove the gauge and pour a small bit of oil into the spark plug hole to seal the rings, and then repeat the compression test. So it says that if it's significantly higher afterwards, then the cause is most likely a worn cylinder, piston, or rings. Which, I mean, given the mileage, it's probably gonna be a higher number. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we put a little bit of oil in there to seal the rings and the compression goes back up to 160, because it's really close. So let's do that really quick just to test that theory. We got oil here as it shows and a little turkey baster. So I'm just gonna put it in there. In it goes. Let's put this back in and retest. Okay, just as we expected, it's higher. Look at that, it's like 160, actually a little bit over 160. How cool is that? That's really nice to know with these engines that it can run for so long and basically be perfect. I mean, with these numbers, honestly, I don't even have to replace the top end here. I still will, because I want to. I want to get in there, kind of see how things look, and just kind of freshen things up overall. Gotta burn off all that oil in there. Smoky in here. But there we have it, just a quick little performance test, and we've set the bar pretty high. Next, all we have to do is just basically maintain that bar, make sure that nothing changes when we do the top end rebuild. Next up, we are going to actually dig into this, break everything out, and see what a piston, what a cylinder, what rings look like after 20,000 miles. Then, all this is going to be going in. We got gaskets, O-rings, piston rings, a whole cylinder even. All this OEM brand new stuff going to be going in, making this thing 100% fresh. So until then.